right, welcome to another episode of Coffee and Cargo. It's the first one of the new year. So welcome, happy 2024. We're happy to have you all here. Lots to get to today, but first, of course, introductions. My name's Emily Smith. I work in the marketing department here at Interlog. I'm joined today, as always, with Justin Engelmeyer, Vice President at Interlog, Ben Schwingle, International Operations Director at Interlog, and Rachel Thielen, Marketing Manager here at Interlog. So today, to kind of go through our agenda, we'll be kind of discussing kind of the state of global trade and kind of the impacts that it may have on you. We'll be getting into updates on the Panama and Suez canals, rates, capacity, routing options, and all those impacts for you. Justin, I'm going to throw it to you here. Can you kind of tell our viewers about the rise in rates the last couple months, largely due to the canal issues, where they kind of are at currently, and where are they expected to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look back 2 months ago, our webinar then was all focused on the Panama Canal, the droughts there, the El Nino, how is this going to affect us? They were drastically reducing the number of vessels allowed to go through the canal per day. And it was really going to put a strain on the rest of the cargo coming in through that area. And we didn't know when the rates would necessarily change. They had predictions of, when they were really going to lower the number of vessels would be February 6th, something like that. So we were kind of predicting, all right, maybe a little bit before Chinese New Year, maybe after. We're not 100% sure when we're going to see those changes or how drastic they're going to be. Literally the following month, the disruption in the Red Sea, that started happening. And therefore, it took out one of the options for routing it versus the Panama Canal through the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal now is a larger issue than the Panama Canal. So now we have an issue over there, and it right now, this past weekend, the carriers took notice. They're looking at how much more it's costing them. They're creating other issues where it's, what capacity is going around and what routings are they able to utilize. And the rates just went through the roof this past weekend. So you can see on the graph here of how it's kind of just a boomerang where it shot right up. I don't think anyone could have predicted that this was going to happen 2 months ago, but once that issue started happening in the Red Sea, we knew it was going to be volatile. Ben, would you like to touch a little bit on this?
Yeah, I would probably back it up to last summer when we had historically low ocean carrier rates following years of excessive highs. And when the Panama Canal surcharges, $400 a container, something like that, were being implemented in November, as you touched on, that felt like legitimate, but maybe the carriers were trying to bring the market back up to a new floor, what will cover their costs. But the spike that happened December and definitely mid-January was totally a result of the Red Sea restrictions. And that was not expected. On the chart there, the blue line is your traditional rates every year. It holds pretty steady until the last couple of weeks before Chinese New Year, where they could see their value in their space for some bookings right before the 2-week lull. But we are already experiencing rate hikes of more than that $1,000 that normally happens before Chinese New Year. We're seeing rates 100% increase on most lanes in the United States, regardless if it goes to the Panama Canal or not, the Red Sea. And I don't know, this next image right there shows the Cape of Good Hope, but consider the Panama Canal only affects freight going to U.S. East Coast, Caribbean, and South American East Coast. It's still a shorter transit time to go around the Cape of Good Hope from Asia to Europe than Asia through the Panama Canal to Europe.
But Ben, while the Panama Canal, while it's not as large of an issue at the moment here, the Panama Canal still has restrictions on it. So you can't just reroute everything through there anyways. They still have only X amount of capacity to go through there. So they're not rerouting it through the Panama Canal. There's still restrictions on that. So the stuff coming from Trans-Pacific going to the Caribbean or the East Coast of the US, there's a delay of roughly a week. The pricing is still higher, but But again, now if we're getting into the pricing here and we talk about this, let's talk, you and I, we've discussed this a lot over the last few days here, but let's start off with, Ben, how have the costs increased for the carriers? When we look at this and it's going down south of Africa versus going through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, well, explain to the viewers a little bit about how their costs increase and why it's happening.
Mm-hmm. This was like mid-December, right after our last webinar. We're monitoring how much more time was required and if ships were deciding to go through the Red Sea or maybe go for the around Africa route. And if you remember back a couple of years when the Evergreen vessel was stuck in the Suez Canal and the ship started going around Cape of Good Hope, they would start that direction. By the time the ship was freed in the Suez Canal, they turned around and went back through. It just wasn't worth it to continue around the Cape of Good Hope. But this problem is persisting and it's adding 10 to 14 days of transit time for vessels coming from Asia to Europe. And vessels that are on a weekly schedule have to be reliable to be at those ports of call every week. Means they had to add in 1 or 2 ships to each of these, what's called a string, from Asia to Europe, adding perhaps 2 vessels to a string that normally had 6, 7 vessels. So what would that
Well,
be?
and let's talk about that. Okay, so you have, let's just use your example here. You're normally using 6 or 7 vessels that go from, you know, that on the same route that would go through the Suez Canal, right, to get over to Europe. Now you have to bump that up to 8 or 9 vessels. One, a lot of times they're chartering another vessel. They're paying extra. They're not, it's not even going on their own vessel, right? That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that they're spending a lot chartering vessels, and the charter vessels are making bank right now.
Yeah, well, whether it's owned or chartered, there's going to be those additional costs for in longer transit time. It means more fuel. It means more maintenance.
For the
Crew,
exact same capacity. The exact same capacity.
the exact same demand. Mhm.
Demand.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the question here: capacity and demand. Panama Canal, these ships are carrying fewer containers, so they have a higher draft.
Right.
The other route, and this doesn't apply to just Europe. I mean, of course, the Indian, the Asian subcontinent goes through the Suez Canal to the U.S. East Coast too. So whatever we're saying about around Cape of Good Hope is not just for Europe. This is impacting American importers directly too.
So there's a direct cost relation to this, right? It is costing the carriers more, so the carriers are pushing back for that purpose. But then there's the other part that you touched on briefly, and that's where the carriers see that they have value. And I believe that that's part of it too. So one thing is, all right, it's costing them more, and instead of just being able to put that large increase of price on those lanes, right, on the lanes that are directly affected by this, they're spreading it across all other lanes that they go through as well. So that's one theory. Another is that they have a good understanding of the value that they're creating for the importers at the moment, and they're taking advantage of that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of talks, you and I, with our customers, let's just say on the US West Coast. And they want to know why their rates are going up $1,000 or 100% from what they were in December. And your first explanation, that seems logical. The carriers are just spreading out the cost on all lanes. Doesn't seem fair to those customers. But the other reasoning I'm put more faith in and belief in is that carriers are deciding where they can increase rates because of the increased cost. There's a picture in front of you around Cape of Good Hope, and they're finding where they can increase rates because of their value, how much someone's willing to pay. That was tested to extremes in the past few years. So,
And so that leaves, you know, and we're having conversations with our customers all week long. And at the end of last week here, you have customers debating, well, what do I do? Is this going to go down? Is it going to go down before Chinese New Year? I really don't see that happening. Is it going to go down drastically right after Chinese New Year? Maybe, but I don't necessarily think so. I don't think that because I don't see this being a direct result solely because of Chinese New Year. And from what we've experienced in the past, especially over the pandemic, when there was a lot of built up pressure around Chinese New Year price happening there, right after it, there's still a ripple effect of people needing to get stuff out of there as well. So I don't necessarily see this being a quick fix. I think that maybe if things are to settle, maybe you're looking at that March 15th date a little bit to have a better indication as to what's going to happen and when's going to happen. So then you have customers sitting here or importers trying to understand, is it better for me to take a risk at possibly overpaying on some freight, or is it that they are, rolling the dice and that they're going to be on back order for their product? And that puts them in a really difficult situation, and not one where you or I have the right answer for them, but that's what they're rolling over in their heads right now is what should we do?
Yeah. Yeah, each company has to make the decision for themselves, and some of the things they'll analyze are the seasonality of their products, if they can afford to be out of stock or very low stock relative to their competitors, especially. That's something we're hearing, and concerns that any product that they don't have for sale to their customers, they may lose that market share to a competitor on this sale and then future sales. So they're weighing, is it worth taking the extra cost and freight to ship it out now, or risk a slight or large drop after Chinese New Year?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult situations. Ben, we do have a couple questions coming in here right now at the moment that we're going to try to address here for a minute here. One person asking how much were the rate increases you saw this week? Was it isolated to imports to East Coast ports? And I believe we covered that a little bit here, but in case not, again, it's spread across everywhere. It's not just the East Coast in the US. It's not just from Asia to Europe. It's everywhere. Rates are blowing through the doors, or off the doors all over the place. It's mass spread at the moment here. Of all the lanes, at least that we're dealing with, that I'm seeing, I don't see really much of anything staying the same at the moment here. And another one touching on the Panama Canal, someone's actually asking, is the rainy season coming at the moment here? And the rainy season is past, right? That's past. So the drought technically could get worse, which is what they're preparing for. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that's what.
No, we're on the same frequency there. And how critical is it if we're trying to talk numbers to give this like proportion? Just we're at about 36 ships per day, right, Emily, through the Panama Canal.
Mhm.
November forecast, we're down to about 2/3 of that, so the low 20s. December had some good news that they were sending through about 28, so about 2/3, 3/4 of usual traffic volume. And the forecast for the rest of the spring is not any more optimistic than what we've had. So we're still bracing for around 2/3 of normal traffic.
Yeah, which puts a strain on the industry in general, in and of itself. I mean, and here we put this up here that Maersk announced. I mean, this is really quite a creative solution. However, I have no idea what the pricing is going to be, but I can't imagine it's cheap. You want to walk me through this? Ben, my understanding is you have one vessel come in from the west, kind of drop off the cargo right, it gets unloaded, gets on a train, gets over to the east side of it, and you have another vessel over on the east side picking this up and bringing it back up to deliver. Is that what I'm seeing here?
It's a clever solution that works for some carriers and how their strings align. I mean, we could go on and pick apart every route and decision that these carriers are making, but they're making very conscious decisions to keep their costs low and the freight moving. In the bottom right-hand corner is the Pacific Ocean. So if you're importing from Australia to the US East Coast, it'll be dropped off there by Maersk, taken by rail to the east side, the Atlantic Ocean, and then sail on a different vessel. That's Hapag-Lloyd's solution. Well, that works for that carrier, but not all carriers have that luxury of strings matching up right. So there's disruption everywhere you're looking about the vessel schedules, how much they're going to take. Do we need more vessels on the string to Europe and the US East Coast? It's been a real disruption, not just in timing, but number of vessels that are needed and where they need to be. That's where you're seeing the blank sailings and higher costs.
So Ben, if we can back up here for 1 second and again and talk to the vast majority of our customers that bring stuff in possibly through the West Coast or even to the East Coast from the Trans-Pacific lanes, and we obviously have stuff coming from Europe and India all over that are being affected. They're affected by price, right? Everything's being affected by the price at the moment here. But what about capacity in terms of how quickly are you able to book something, get it out? Is there any constraints on that at the moment? Are we seeing any backlogs of that on bookings? And two, what about any capacity or congestion issues happening at any port within the US? Are people also expected to experience more of that? Because I know when we first were talking about these things, it's, hey, there's ripple effects, and there's ripple effects all over the place. If we look back at when the Evergreen vessel was stuck in the Suez Canal, I mean, that had ripple effects that lasted quite a while. This stuff in the Red Sea is far more drastic. The Panama Canal is far more drastic. So what type of ripple effects are we seeing? And has it happened yet? Have we really seen any sort of congestion or dare I say, meltdowns in certain areas where people aren't getting the service that they expect or need?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's like two good questions there. I'm glad you brought them up. So if I broke it apart into what about bookings and is there congestion at the origin ports? Or yes, this is the time where typically do see that before Chinese New Year. An overbooking and cancellations or rolled bookings. Not a big problem if you're just trying to get your cargo out before Chinese New Year. It'll ingate to the terminal. It may not make the first vessel of Chinese New Year, but it may make the second one during the middle of it. However, as we went back to that chart where the rates were increasing, there are some carriers that are offering substantially lower rates, and not for 2-week periods, but 5-day windows. So there'll be a rush on those cheaper bookings, maybe a few $100s less than the bulk of the rest of their competition. And then they'll be overbooked, and then there'll be disappointment, and rates will go up while those customers, those importers, are trying to find a different booking than the original one they tried to get, which is fine. Play those games and have an alternate option. Try to get the lower cost booking, but know that if that's declined, have a secondary plan in place right away. That's what we always harp on.
And Ben, before we get to the congestion stuff that I brought up and whether or not that's occurring here, if I could touch back on this here, I remember you and I were sitting here around Chinese New Year, and this was 2021. So after the pandemic had started, already hit, and now the ripple effects of all that stuff happening, I remember it being absolutely crazy trying to get a booking and, fighting for every single one container out of 5 that you can get on some vessel here for Chinese New Year, was a victory right at that cusp. We're not seeing any of that at the moment, but to your point, if someone's offering, a discount on price, those things could go that quickly. And I think from what I'm hearing, you're suggesting be aware of that. And if you need something out, either go with the more premium or be aware that it might not get out when you think it's going to. Is that correct? Because we're not seeing the same thing. This isn't sitting here like, holy cow, you're not going to be able to get anything out the door.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I like you use the word premium, and there are premium services out there. MSC brought back their diamond tier service. That was something during COVID we saw that they came up with. That was guaranteed space, guaranteed priority when it came to the US shore, get on the rail and move inland. That was diamond tier, and that's the one that was $30,000 when the rest were $20,000. Right now, they're $7,000 when everyone else is $3,900, $7,000 when everyone else is like $3,900. Somewhere to give you an idea just how far above the pack this diamond tier service is. Zim has another expedited service of similar pricing, premium. But what I was saying was there's a middle of the pack, which is high, and that chart that we had shows that. And there's a few outliers below it. And you can try for those bookings, but have an alternate plan that's somewhere in that middle of the pack booking and pricing.
And how close to Chinese New Year? Because we're still a little bit away from it. How close to Chinese New Year are people able to bounce around between the two and try to take advantage of these lower pricing options?
You have about 3 more weeks of bookings that will engage before Chinese New Year. So seeing through the end of this week and 2 more for placing bookings. That's the time frame.
Okay. All right. So now I bet back to the congestion. Are we seeing congestion across the US and other areas where this ripple effect from, moving more stuff through the West Coast possibly than going through the Panama Canal, or, routings using the rail and stuff? Are we getting backed up at the rail more than we were before? Has that started to happen, or do you see it coming?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I thought we were going to have a container displacement problem. It's not that great. When the Red Sea restriction hit, and we saw that 14-day lag time, that meant that many fewer containers were getting to Europe to be loaded for exports out to the United States, or arriving at US shores for US exports out of the United States. It wasn't a critical lag time and ripple effect there. And I'm glad that we're not experiencing the other curse words in our industry, which is chassis shortage, demurrage, rail yard congestion. That's not happening right now, because demand is not outpacing the capacity on those sectors, the trucking and the rail.
So if import volumes start to pick up, and I mean pick up, not slight little increases, but if they do start to increase, you're going to see a lot more strains, and the ripple effects are going to take more place than they are right now. But right now, given the circumstances, I guess things are running as smoothly as could be expected. The rates have just gone up, and that's the main factor that's going to affect the importers.
Yeah, all the conditions we're talking about in this webinar this month, my 2 main takeaways would be predicting the departure date with the blank sailings in your transit time product to arrive here. And secondly, asking yourself, do we want to take risks of not having product on hand when our competitor might? And is that additional freight cost worth the risk?
And do you agree with my assessment of the middle of March being a good barometer? Because I don't necessarily think right after Chinese New Year is gonna. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the rates are gonna plummet right after it. I don't foresee that happening, because so much of this pressure has nothing to do with Chinese New Year.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to drop substantially, not like in years past, where it may have come down $1,000. Not when we're up 3,000.
Right. Right.
Or more.
So, yeah, I mean, it really does. It goes back to, and I do urge you. I urge you to speak with your forwarder. I urge you, if you guys aren't getting the answers you want from them, I urge you to reach out to us. Have conversations with what your options are. The people like Ben in our industry that know, all right, we have these bookings on place. This is how much space we have for these guys that are at least less than the middle of the pack, which are extremely high, let alone this premium stuff that whomever is using that. How much space do you have? What can you expect? When can you still get your cargo here? I think talking about the routing, seeing what you're able to do with that stuff is still very vital at this point in time for you guys. And it's lane specific. You really have to figure out exactly where it's coming from, where it's going to, and what your needs are. Am I missing anything on that, Ben?
No, those are good points. And I know you gather a lot of intelligence just from a conversation with your customers and what they're forecasting, what their concerns are. I think I actually have a few more points in here. We're talking about the contract season coming up too, and how they're forecasting with impact. Yeah, there is. Carriers are not signing contracts, so there's a whole lot more going on right now than Chinese New Year and Red Sea higher costs. Right, Red Sea restrictions causing higher costs. There is the element of Carriers are finding what they can charge based on their value, not just the cost.
Sure. Hey, Ben, one more question here while we have a minute, because I noticed that there's quite a few questions in here and we will try to reach out to all of you. But one, we touched a little bit on congestion here, but specifically railing from the West Coast to the East Coast, which wasn't as large of an option before these issues with the canals. But is that more of an option now? And is there some congestion within that? You're going across multiple different railroads to get from the west to the east. So, is that more of a viable option right now?
As more peace of mind, the rate's slightly higher than going through the Panama Canal. The transit time is just a little bit shorter. There's more peace of mind to it. I don't see many customers choosing that option. But that's what you're talking about across the country from Los Angeles to Baltimore in New York.
Yep.
It's to each their own, but it's not very popular. It's available, the more peace of mind. No, it's not happening much.
And I mean, again, though, that could change at any point in time, right? So, but right now, at the moment, that's not your recommendation. It is available. From what I'm hearing, there really isn't a whole lot of extra congestion within that routing because not a ton of people are utilizing it at the moment.
That's right. No, things that we'll see cause congestion and problems on that rail network is going to be winter storms in like the Vancouver and Prince Rupert ports between there and the Midwest. Containers aren't coming through on the rail. People are choosing to go through Long Beach instead. And that'll be a ripple effect as everyone alters their choice based on a moment in time winter hazard or track disruption in Canada.
Right. All right, Emily. With that being said, I know you've got a few things to get to here.
Yeah, I will take over. Before we close out, we have a few polls that we'd like to hear from you guys on. The first one, you'll see it get launched here in a second. The first one is kind of what's your biggest concern? I know we talked about a few here in this webinar, or what are you currently focusing on right now and in the months to come? And then something new we did as well is if you are interested in hearing from us, I know Justin mentioned it. We would love to have that conversation or further discuss some of these topics with you. So if that is something you are interested in, just leave a question or maybe your lanes in this poll and we can get back to you later today. Make sure to add an email in there so we know who to reach out to. So I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes, but to close it out, next Coffee and Cargo is going to be February 21st, 2024, 10 a.m. Central Time. We also do a mailing list. I know quite a few of you are on it, but if you would like us to sign you up every month so you don't have to, just email myself at rachel@interlogusa.com. We also have the rest of our emails here if you'd like to reach out to us directly. But thank you guys for coming and hopefully we see you next month. Thank you, Justin, Ben, and Emily. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.